welcome to The Link Online. How do you like that for an intro? Welcome to The Link Online. Yes, we are here live on Facebook and live on our website. Now, you got to put the mic on there. Right? Yeah. See, you're talking. He didn't want to talk. I got him talking.
Now you got to introduce him.
And listen, welcome to the first day of summer, right? Because
yes, isn't it wonderful?
After what was a long winter.
And wonderful winter. I loved it. Lots of snow, lots of skiing.
You know what's funny?
I love winter. I'm the only Canadian, maybe.
No, I love winter too, but shoveling and cleaning off the car this year was just way too much fun.
Yeah, I could really dig winter if there's only like 2 weeks of it. You know?
I need a garage for the car.
But you know what's funny was they were saying in the weather reports across Canada, heat wave, because we're so used to the rotten weather we've been having that 2 days of 24-degree weather constitutes a heat wave.
Oh, but that was a heat wave out in BC, 39.5 degrees.
And fires. Carmel did a story on it. Check our website.
Here we go again.
How long is the jingle? Are we actually going to be able to finish the introduction?
We can go on forever.
All right. Then.
Oscar
But
Peterson.
you know what? I know. You're chomping at the bit. So, Lynn Desjardins, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Carmel Kilkenny, welcome to the show. And on keyboards and a fan of the bicycle kick, Leo Jimeno.
Hi.
And in the control room, Chantal Saint-Sauveur. And I'm Mark Montgomery. And coming up on the show this hour, Lynn.
There are more people fleeing their homes in the world than ever before. I'll take a look at how Canada and other countries rank in receiving those people who need refugee protection.
Carmel?
And as the school year ends, Canada gets a low grade when it comes to digital literacy. We'll hear what the challenges are in teaching it to the next generation.
And a civil rights lawyer looks at a landmark decision by the Supreme Court of Canada which ruled against a Christian university. Those are stories coming up on this edition of The Link Online. Well, Wednesday, June 20th was World Refugee Day, and that made headlines for many reasons. The world watched images of U.S. authorities separating parents who had entered the country. But the United Nations Refugee Agency painted a broader picture of the, somewhat shocking number of people who have been displaced from their homes around the world. And then you looked into this.
I did, Mark. The UN says war, violence, and persecution drove 16.2 million people from their homes in 2017. And that brings the total number of displaced persons in the world to 68.5 million. Now, Canada ranked 9th in terms of the number of asylum seekers it received, and that number more than doubled from the year before to 47,800. These new arrivals in Canada included over 7,000 from Haiti, over 5,000 from Nigeria, over 2,000 United States. Wave of migrants and quarreling about who should admit them. For details on the situation of refugees, I spoke with Petra Molnar. She is a lawyer and researcher with the International Human Rights Program at the University of Toronto.
It's important to remember that human migration has been going on since time immemorial. But you are right. Today we are dealing with an unprecedented number of people who have been displaced, and that's really due to a multitude of complex geopolitical factors, such as ongoing conflicts, resource extraction and environmental concerns, and even economic factors that are compelling people to migrate.
And where are the refugees coming from?
There are a number of conflict areas that are causing people to flee for their lives, including in the Middle East and parts of Africa, such as Sudan and the Congo, and then many countries in Latin America as well. But most refugees actually are hosted in neighboring countries that are closest to the conflict, such as Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and Kenya, just to name a few. And actually, less than 1% of refugees are resettled globally to countries like Canada.
How does Canada fare when it comes to resettling refugees?
Well, Canada should really be proud of itself because we stepped up when we needed to, and we resettled over 35,000 Syrian refugees. But again, globally, resettlement is just one small piece of the puzzle when we're trying to understand how refugees move from place to place and what needs to be done to ensure that people have the protections and the ability to exercise their human rights as they need to.
How do you see the situation going on in the United States right now?
It's definitely a developing situation, and it's a worrisome one. Anytime there are children involved, I think it really causes us to take a pause and reflect on what kind of policies we have and what they actually mean. And it's very clear that migration and seeking refuge is a very traumatic experience for anyone, especially a child. And I think we sometimes forget that. And as you might be aware, the Trump administration came out with an executive order yesterday, basically banning the practice of taking children away from their parents, which, on the one hand is a welcome development, but on the other hand, we are worried that it's really just part and parcel of the same thing. And in fact, it might be used to justify increasing numbers of detention for families. So while it's, of course, good that children aren't being ripped away from their parents anymore, which was on many grounds immoral and illegal, at the same time, this is just entrenching the detention apparatus even further without actually looking at the root causes of why people are migrating and whether they actually have the ability to exercise their right to seek asylum in the U.S.
There has been backlash in much of Europe and many wealthy countries. Why is that?
I mean, I think a lot of this backlash is based on inaccurate and overblown fears around migration and this kind of fear-mongering and xenophobia that we're seeing across the world. Because shutting down borders doesn't really make sense in our increasingly interconnected world, right? If you shut down your borders, you're shutting yourself away from innovation and from really building a truly inclusive, democratic, and multicultural society. And if you look at a country like Canada, immigrants and refugees bring in so much good to their new home, economically and socially, and this kind of fear-mongering really is not based on reality.
And that was Petra Molnar, a lawyer and researcher at the University of Toronto. And one of the other stories I dealt with this week was when all that news came out about how the Americans were separating parents from children, there was a great hue and cry here in Canada asking that Canada declare null and void the Safe Third Country Agreement. And that's an agreement whereby if people come from the United States to Canada and seek refugee status at an illegal border crossing, not an official border crossing, at an official border crossing, we have to turn them back because it is considered that the United States is a safe country. And what people were saying was that given all the evidence of what's been going on, the separation of children, but also the very hard-line policies of the United States, that the U.S. is no longer a safe country and Canada should no longer consider it to be a safe country and shouldn't be turning people back. So far, the government is not prepared to do that.
But don't we also separate children from families in this country? Isn't there some evidence of that?
The minister responsible, Ralph Goodale, a few years ago set out a policy saying that we should not separate children from their families. However, what we do is we do incarcerate them together with their parents.
Well, there you go.
I mean, but there are time limits on it. It's not supposed to happen for very long. I think the maximum is 20 days. Yeah. But, that is one of the criticisms leveled at the Canadian government.
A touchy situation indeed. Yeah. Speaking of touchy situations, we'll have a report on the Supreme Court of Canada controversial decision. Well, a very interesting and rather controversial case made it to the Supreme Court of Canada this week. It involved a Christian university, Trinity Western, which wanted to open a law school. And the law societies of Ontario, Nova Scotia, and British Columbia said, oh, no, you can't. We won't accept your students. Now, Trinity is a private evangelical university, and it has a code of conduct saying things like no cheating, no lying, no alcohol on campus, and no sex unless you're in a marriage between a man and a woman. Now, the law societies of those provinces said they wouldn't accept the graduates because the university's covenant discriminated against gays and lesbians. The university took the case to the Supreme Court, which has just ruled in favor of the law societies 5-2-2 and against the university. And those are two concurring decisions, but with different reasons, and two dissenting opinions. Now, I spoke with John Carpe, president of the nonprofit civil justice organization Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, who is both puzzled and concerned with the Supreme Court decision.
Ignored the fact that there are gay students at Trinity Western, and there's Muslim students, and there's atheist students. You can be what you want, you can believe what you want. The only requirement, if you want to study there, is you have to abide by that code of conduct. And if you don't want to abide by it, there's dozens of other universities in Canada to go to.
How is this going to affect Trinity Western?
Yeah, I don't know if Trinity Western is going to proceed with the law school anyway, where the graduates are not guaranteed spots. The other irony in this situation is that the law societies of BC and Ontario have no qualms with a graduate from a Saudi Arabian law school who may have been trained in Sharia law and who thinks it's okay to throw gays off of buildings. They also have no problems with American universities like Brigham Young University that has a code of conduct exactly like Trinity Western's and that says, no sex outside of the marriage between one man and one woman. And all you have to do to become lawyers in Canada is take 12 months worth of equivalency courses, and presto, they become lawyers. So it's very much a double standard. You've got these law societies going after a Canadian law school that would actually bring some real diversity into legal education.
Well, what is the effect then that this Supreme Court decision may have, the wider effects? Again, if you're pitting, theoretically, two freedoms enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms against each other, and one sort of is now allowed to take precedence, I would presume. You can clarify that, please.
Yeah. I think it would be it would be bad enough if the Supreme Court had actually used part of the Charter to trample on religious freedom, but there's no charter right against Trinity Western. So people who disagree with the community covenant to Trinity Western and who don't want to study there, they don't have an equality right under the Charter to get into that school any more than, you or I, might have some sort of a charter right to join a local basketball league if our basketball skills are not good enough. The free society really depends on people being able to form their own associations and not have them destroyed or even undermined by people coming and saying, oh, well, I disagree with what you're all about, but I want to become a member and you're discriminating against me. I mean, it's absurd.
Could this decision then have wider implications for other organizations across Canada?
Oh, absolutely. The other thing so troubling about the judgment is when you read the dissent, you actually read some law in there where they use legal reasoning, and yet in the majority judgment, it reads like a political tract. They just repeatedly assert this mantra of equality, diversity, inclusion, and that majority decision is so political. You think it was like written by a political party with these vague slogans. They say, oh, we have to be in favor of diversity. Well, they're actually attacking diversity because if Trinity Western did get a law school, then you would actually have some real diversity in legal education in Canada for the first time in decades, because the other schools are all uniformly very left-wing and feminist and so on. So it's an anti-diversity decision, in fact.
Excerpt of my conversation with lawyer John Carpe, president of the nonprofit civil justice organization Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. You're listening to The Link Online, and it's now time to take a look at some of your comments to stories posted on the website. And a reminder that public commenting is open on all RCI stories. Just scroll to the bottom of each story to read the comments of others or post your own comment. Now, starting us off this week, FIFA is attracting worldwide attention. The World Cup Football Championship taking place in Russia. We had the announcement that the expanded 2026 World Cup was awarded to a combined bid of Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. And Peter Ashcroft of England asked, what would be the greatest distance between fixtures?
Well, as an example, if we presume games will be held in Mexico City and Vancouver, that would be over 4,800 kilometers apart driving and about 3,900 kilometers by air. If Mexico City and Montreal, for example, that's about 4,700 kilometers apart by road, 3,700 kilometers by air, but that's across 3 countries. Now, so just even within Canada, of course, driving between, excuse me, just the thought of it, chokes me up. Montreal
It's
and
the
Vancouver.
gas prices.
Oh, yeah, that's it for sure. Montreal and Vancouver is between 4,600 and 5,000 kilometers, depending on the route, although it is beautiful and every Canadian should do it sometime. And by air, about 3,600 kilometers.
That's kind of surprising. I think when you think about it, when I was looking at this, the distance between it's not even two ends of the country, because Montreal is about 1,000 kilometers from the other side. So just between Montreal and Vancouver, because you could go even farther to Victoria, it's almost the same distance, almost exactly the same distance as Montreal, Mexico City. It's astounding how big this country is.
So they've awarded
5,000, sorry.
They've awarded it to a continent.
Yes, basically. Canada across from east to west is 5,800 kilometers. So, yep, huge country.
And
I don't know how those footballers are going to get transported. It's a good question.
All right, now we have some responses to our story about that Supreme Court decision we just heard a few moments ago. First from B. Robinson.
Sounds like the decision has contradictions and should be appealed so as to allow diversity and freedom of societies to create their own rules of conduct. More work needs to be done to protect our freedoms. And I guess we should say that you cannot appeal a Supreme Court decision. It is the top court in the land, and that is where the other appeals go for a final verdict.
All right, another comment on the Supreme Court ruling against the Christian University and their code of conduct. This one from Peter Ashcroft.
LGBT members have a personal sexual relationship which should not impinge on supposedly gender-neutral legislation and decisions. The SCC seems to have slipped up on their overall decision.
And on that same story, Christoph Saunders wrote a long response which said, in part,
do not Christians have the same legal rights? Can they not attend a school where they will be comfortable attending with others of like Christian values and practices? These values are clearly stated, and if you feel you cannot uphold those values, then there are many other schools that you can attend where you will fit in and be accepted. This school is not going out of their way to harm anyone that does not believe in their value system. They merely want the same rights as all other self-identifying groups. Why is it that every other group, other than the Christian group, must be shown acceptance?
And just to recap, the Christian University, Trinity Western, has a community covenant saying that students must agree to things like not cheating, lying, or alcohol on campus, and that the students should abstain from sex if they are not in a heterosexual marriage. The university wanted to open a law school, but some provincial law bodies said the covenant discriminates, and it also said that no sex for heterosexuals unless they are married as well. That should be an important point to remember. The provincial body said they wouldn't accept the graduates because of the apparent LGBT discrimination. The Supreme Court ruled in their favor. And again, on that story, Marie commented,
I'm having trouble understanding the difference between, one, the government requiring applicants for their summer jobs grant to sign an attestation that the applicant supports the government's value test, and two, the Supreme Court of Canada is denying a university the right to have their law students admitted to the bar because students have to sign a values covenant. Is the signature of an attestation different from a covenant? I don't understand. Where's the balance?
All right, moving on to another story called Roadmap for Montrealers to Help Disabled Navigate Their Hometown. Roby Pratka wrote this.
Great piece. And the more this absurd situation is discussed, the better. However, people don't really say confined to a wheelchair anymore. A wheelchair is a mobility aid, not some kind of iron lung that limits a person. Using or relying on a wheelchair would be better wording.
On the story, Canada's founding father takes another hit, and this is in reference to the Canadian Historical Association removing the name Sir John A. Macdonald of prizes, and that's due to his connection to the residential school system. Ahmed Abukar wrote,
inequality and injustice, then he does not qualify as a hero, in quotes, in today's Canada.
And another story called 5G Corridor coming to Ontario and Quebec. Alexander wrote,
what is 5G? There is a tricky problem when it comes to defining what exactly 5G coverage is.
Does anybody know what 5G coverage is?
It's more. A lot more.
It's more.
More.
Faster.
Much more.
And probably more expensive.
Maybe Leo knows.
Do you know what 5G is?
Yes, but I can't say it in English. It is really complicated. Okay, it's big, you can have more connections and less problems with connections.
Okay.
So it's
and it'll cost more, right?
But
no, it's going to be the same.
It's the future.
Yeah, because actually with the 4G connection, you have a limited quantity of devices connected. And with 5G, you can triple that. So,
oh, good.
Well, there you go.
3 phones. I can't afford 3 phones.
Speaking of digital literacy, guess what's coming up next on the program?
Yes, indeed.
Well, according to a study released this week, there is a cause for concern about the digital literacy of the younger generation and of us of Canadians. Carmel, this may surprise some people. What are the findings?
Well, the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship is based at Ryerson University in Toronto, and they monitor what's going on across the country in this area. In their recent study entitled Leveling Up, the Quest for Digital Literacy, the authors are warning that there are gaps. There's a fragmented approach in Canada. Sean Mullen is the executive director, and he says we risk falling behind and not allowing the next generation of our workforce to have the skills they need. Here's an excerpt of my conversation with him earlier this week.
Well, we seem to have a little bit of a technical issue there. Just tell us a little bit about this, Carmel.
Well, he's basically saying that kids are graduating now, and it's so highly skilled, the demands of the jobs they're going into, that if the education does not keep pace with the changes, then these kids are going to be less and less employable. He talked about something they point out in this study. It's not so much about necessarily coding, which of course countries like Australia and Britain have put into their elementary school.
But didn't our government say there was going to spend millions of dollars on that?
They promised $50 million in January, and it's for provincial governments, of course, who apply that money. So again, there's no national vision about this. It's each province can do it differently. Do they do it in schools? Is it like an after-hours thing? How do they teach it? Sean Mullins does acknowledge it's not easy to teach because it changes so rapidly, but that it's something that Canadians have to be thinking of. And hopefully young parents are really addressing this. He talked about the change to computational thinking more than coding. It's getting kids thinking the way a computer works. And he mentioned a little toy.
A toy?
By Fisher-Price, a little plug here. A Coda Pillar.
Coda Pillar, okay.
And so it's like for little kids, 4, 5, 6, 7 maybe, and they can put this together and they learn how to basically, it's the beginning of coding.
But I mean, is it a question that students will be taking classes in school, like on computer classes, like we used to take, history and
typing
Well, he says that, there's always a debate about how to teach reading.
But the same difference between teaching math and teaching how to use a calculator.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
it's the same.
Yeah.
You are teaching to kids to how to use the computer and not how to do the computer works. So it's
it's a good analogy.
But of course, I mean, that's one of the things I think they said was that it's becoming more and more a requirement in every job to have not just basic computer skills, but advanced computer skills.
He provided the analogy, which you can, of course, relate to. I can't, but, cars, if you know roughly how a gasoline-powered engine works, it's pretty well the same across most cars. I haven't a clue, but generally a lot of people do. So that's the kind of thing that they get this kind of larger contextual knowledge, and then they're able to step into it.
Well, I mean, it's just certainly the future. But pretty much everything is going to be, if it's not already, it's going to be connected in some way and understand how to use it. I mean, there are so many things people can do with their phones. I mean, even I don't understand some of the things I can do with my phone, which I should, I suppose.
Yeah, and speaking of cars,
leave it down maybe once in a while.
Yeah, speaking of cars, there was a story today about a Canadian who had his windshield broken and went to have it replaced. And then he ran into a terrible problem because one of the computers in the car that it's a new car, so it senses a lot and keeps you in one lane and prevents you from being too close to the next car. So when he had the windshield replaced, apparently the little camera that enables all of this wasn't properly connected. So it kept trying to get him to go into the other lane in oncoming traffic.
Oh, no.
So he filed a complaint with the Transport Board in Canada, and we'll see what comes of that. But,
Is that an example of artificial intelligence gone wrong?
Well, talking about artificial intelligence in cars, one of the things that I keep coming up with is major cities like Montreal, Toronto, or Boston, New York, London, whatever. The police ticket people for infractions. People are driving, they go through red lights, they speed, they park illegally. And a city like Toronto, for example, I mean, they take, just in parking tickets alone, they take in about $100 million a year. And you add to that the traffic infractions, that's like $200 million, which goes into the city budget. And if you have a lot of autonomous cars, which cannot speed, they cannot go through red lights and so on, you're going to be taking out, autonomous cars, it's great, but you're going to be taking $200 million out of the city budget.
Yeah.
Where are they going to get that money from?
Savings for all the people who are not going to be injured in traffic accidents, apparently. This is what I hear. There's going to be terrific savings because there will be fewer.
But what about parking tickets? $100 million in parking tickets. No injuries there, but,
I still can't quite believe this because I love driving. I don't want to.
Well, that's the other issue.
Yeah.
Some people really like to drive, and will we be allowed to drive in future? It's a good question. You might have to become a race car driver, Carmel.
Well, that wouldn't be.
The other thing I think of is that with these little increments of technology, and this is something real listeners can join in on perhaps, the other increments of technology, people are not being able to drive very good anymore. You don't have to park. That was a parking test, right? You had to be able to parallel park and so on and so forth. Now you just push a button and the car does it itself.
Oh.
People don't even know how to turn their heads to look behind them before they're changing lanes.
That beautiful geometrical concoction. When you get it, it's so good.
I have actually told my daughter, don't bother learning to drive. She laments, she's about 26 years old, she laments the fact that she doesn't know how to drive, and I keep saying, don't bother. In a couple of years, none of us are going to be driving cars anyway.
I will be.
I'm going to drive my antique on the road.
But I've got this not-so-new car, 2012, and it's got some lovely bells and whistles, but what it does not have, I cannot get over it, is a button or something inside the car to open the trunk. I thought this was the world's greatest invention, and I have to get out. Every time I want to open the trunk, I have to get out and walk back.
Don't you have a lever on the side?
No, I haven't found it. I keep intending to go back to the dealership to find out, but...
Only 6 years later,
exactly.
Carmel.
Well, I have a 2006, and it has automatic door locking, which is just driving me crazy. You drive about 50 feet and the door's all locked. Yeah. And of course, you get out to do something and, oh, damn, the door's locked in the back, or the trunk thing, or I have a minivan, so it's the gate, everything's locked.
Yeah,
it's
but that's for us because our purses won't get stolen when we drive to a stoplight, you see.
You think so?
I never thought of that.
You put your purse in the back seat, nobody can open the door. It's a very handy thing. Not that
doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
Not here anyway. I've seen it on YouTube, right? Right, Leo? Anyway, well, that answers that question a little bit anyway about this Brookfield Institute and their report on computer literacy for young people in Canada. Of course, if you want to learn more, go to the website and look at that story, the Carmel story there, and find out a bit more about that. That brings us almost to the end of the show. But Leo, let's talk about World Cup. What happened to Argentina?
Nothing happens. Thanks to Nigeria today, and we'll have one nice opportunity to get back.
But is the level of the game? What do you think? When you've been watching this,
the worst.
Really?
Yeah.
What happened to Brazil too?
I don't know. Brazil is trying to get better, and they have a team. We don't have a team, Argentina. We have a selection. The technical thing, they choose the best players, but they don't know how to play together.
Yeah.
And Brazil is the opposite. They have a really good team, but they don't get connected today. That's a different thing.
Have you been watching a lot?
No, I haven't, but I've been listening to the soundscape in the newsroom.
Yeah, everybody yelling, and
We
you
know
jump
when
out of your
something
chairs,
happens.
people scream.
Well, I think I sort of hear in the background the music that signals just about the end of the program.
But we have to mention before we go the dawn of cannabis in Canada.
Oh, not till mid-October. We'll talk about it in
October
mid-October.
17th. This is big news. A whole new industry starting
Well, you
in
can
Canada.
already smell it sometimes when you're walking down the street or driving in the car.
People don't realize it's not legal yet for recreational use.
All right, that's about all the time. So for Leo Jimeno, Carmel Kilkenny, Lynn Desjardins, Chantal Saint-Sauveur, and myself, thanks for joining us. Take care until next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.